Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Before we begin this morning, we got, Friday, we were informed that all the parties had agreed that there was going to be no cross of witnesses. Howitt and Wallach of the NAACP, South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, and Upstate Forever. The parties asked that they be excused and their pre-filed testimony be read into the record. So, the pre-filed direct testimony of Jonathan Howitt and Jonathan Wallach will be read into the record as though given orally from the stand. What? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Do they both have exhibits?
Yes, sir.
Exhibits 20.
Okay, we will add Jonathan Howitt's exhibits as exhibit number 20 and Jonathan Wallach as exhibits number 21. Okay, let's correct that. Howitt's will be 24 and Wallach's will be 25, hearing exhibit 25. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, company.
Ms. Metzler, would you state your name and business address for the record, please?
Renee Hubbard Metzler, 550 South Tryon Street, Charlotte, North Carolina.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Duke Energy as Managing Director, Retirement and Health and Welfare.
And Ms. Metzler, have you caused to be prepared 15 pages of rebuttal testimony that's been pre-filed in this document?
Yes, I have.
If I were to ask you the questions contained in your rebuttal testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, we would ask that Ms. Metzler's rebuttal testimony be copied into the record as if given from the stand.
Ms. Metzler's pre-file rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Ms. Metzler, would you summarize your testimony for the commission, please?
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My rebuttal testimony addresses compensation-related adjustments recommended by ORS witness Gabi Smith. ORS witness Smith proposes removing 50% of the company's long and short-term incentives, or LTI and STI, program costs based on her position that 50% of the incentives are attributable to company earnings. ORS has also proposed disallowance for certain items, including exceptional contribution awards, lump sum merit increases, service and safety awards, and the lineman's rodeo. Duke Energy's overall compensation philosophy is to target total compensation of base pay and incentives, including both short and long term, at the median of the market when compared to peer companies, with the opportunity to earn more or less relative to the market median based on actual company performance. Therefore, it is not appropriate to consider the various components of total compensation in isolation as ORS witness Smith. The total compensation concept is depicted in figures 1 and 2, which are attached to my summary. In order to attract a well-qualified and well-led workforce, the company must compete in the marketplace to obtain the services of these employees. The recommended adjustment to LTI and STI would render the company's compensation uncompetitive with the market, which would result in the inability to attract and retain the talent this company needs to run a safe and reliable electric system. No witness in this proceeding challenges the reasonableness of the level of compensation expenses reflected in the rate-making test period for the company. No one has challenged that the compensation and benefit programs are necessary and critical in their entirety for attracting, engaging, retaining, and directing the efforts of employees with the skills and experience necessary to safely, efficiently, and effectively provide electric services to Duke Energy Carolina's customers. Accordingly, for the Commission to abrogate these incentives and benefits would be a severe detriment to customers and would result in disallowance of a prudently incurred cost. Moreover, compensation and incentives tied to metrics such as earnings per share and total shareholder return benefit customers because those metrics reflect how employees' contributions translate into overall financial performance. EPS, for example, is a measure of the company's financial performance, and that performance is reflective of how certain goals, such as safety, individual performance, team performance, and customer satisfaction, all of which are components of incentive pay, are met in a cost-effective way. Divorcing employee performance from such an important measure of a rate-regulated company's overall health makes no sense and is counterproductive. Finally, the ORS has also recommended a disallowance of expenses related to employee lump sum merit payments, exceptional contribution awards or spot awards, service and safety awards, and the lineman's rodeo. All of these programs enhance and reinforce employee engagement and or reduce overall costs. Using employee engagement programs as a means of retaining critical skills benefits customers through higher service levels and lower turnover costs. In sum, these are reasonable and prudent expenses that seek to enhance employee engagement and in turn lead to higher levels of customer service, safety, and employee retention. This concludes the summary of my rebuttal testimony.
Please answer any questions that the parties or the commissioners have.
Thank you. Ms. Ferguson, any cross?
No cross.
Ms. Lee? Mr. Elliott? Walmart. Sorry. I lost my place on my page. Sorry. ORS.
Ms. Metzler, and good morning. Going to your testimony, your rebuttal testimony, what can you explain for the Commission, again, the long-term percentage, or the long-term incentive program and what the percentage payout is based on?
Yes, I can. So the long-term incentive plan is available to executives and leaders in the company. And there are two different components of this program. So the executives of the company, which is the top 100 executives, participate in an LTI program that includes performance shares and retention or restricted stock units. The performance shares make up 70% of their award, and they have performance goals of EPS, total shareholder return, and safety. The other 30% of their award is strictly retention award. They're restricted stock units with no performance measures.
My math isn't all that great, but the way I kind of calculate it is 50% of it based on the earnings per share and 25% on the total shareholder return. Would that be correct?
So it's actually 50% of the 70% of their award. So 70% is performance-based, 30% is not. So 50% of the 70% is based on EPS. 25% of the 70% is based on TSR.
Okay. All right. So the earnings per share and the total shareholder return, both of those basically measure how much money the company is making for its shareholders, right?
Yes, as well as for the company, and EPS does benefit customers. It reduces the cost of capital, and how we're able to access capital, which does benefit the customer.
The earnings per share, again, that's money that is generally what paid out in dividends or increases the stock value of the company, correct?
Correct.
How much of this LTI, this long-term incentive program, is Duke asking the customers to pay for?
Well, we believe we would like to, or believe that we should include all of the LTI, because we believe that the financial metrics, along with the non-financial metrics, do benefit customers.
Okay. So it's y'all's position that even though it's based on earnings for shareholders, that ratepayers should pay for it?
That's correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody. Commissioners. Commissioner Whitfield.
Ms. Metzler, just want to ask you a kind of a general question. I don't know if you were in attendance at the night hearings. A lot of comments were made about compensation, and you've had an exchange with Mr. Nelson about the long-term incentive and EPS and that sort of thing. I guess maybe to kind of get this in the record, or maybe for any ratepayers that might be customers that might be watching, is it fair to, would your characterization be that while a portion of some of these, you mentioned top 100 or top, I'm not going to put a number on it, you said 100, let's just say top executives, a portion of their salaries, of course, and I say a small portion is in rate, but is calculated in rates in a rate case. It's probably not the best analogy, but is it fair to say an analogy, just again for the ratepayers, an analogy maybe possibly like a football coach, like Coach Sweeney or Coach Muschamp, that the university pays a portion from the university state tax dollars, and then the booster club, IPTAY, Gamecock Club, whoever, is paying kind of sort of like what the shareholders are compensating that coach, or in your case, that executive, for performance. Is that somewhat of a decent analogy? Because we heard Mr. Garty-Tego talk about, being able to attract and retain talent, and of course, I think he was referencing probably rank and file folks, but then when you get to the top folks, could you share a little bit of insight maybe on that?
So we provide market competitive pay. So we benchmark with other companies to ensure that our compensation programs are market competitive. We don't seek to pay above the market, but we seek to be competitive with the market at the executive level and at the rank and file level as well. Market competitive pay is a reasonable expense to be able to provide safe and reliable service. I'm not an attorney, but it's my understanding that that we are able to recover costs that are reasonable and prudent in order to run our business and provide service to customers. So no one in this proceeding has indicated that our compensation levels as a whole are not reasonable or prudent. Does that answer your question?
I guess so, but I guess what I was maybe getting at with you is things as where Mr. Nelson was headed. What's charged to the ratepayer, and what are the shareholders doing that the ratepayers don't pay, or the shareholders doing that this commission may have no influence over, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me first point out that we have agreed to disallow 50% of the compensation for the top 4 executives in the company, the CEO and the other 3 employees just below her. And I'll just state again that, if
Right.
our market rates are competitive in the marketplace, so we believe that's a reasonable expense. If we lose the ability to recover compensation that is reasonable and market competitive, then we shift that to the shareholders. That's a bit concerning for us.
All right. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Belzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Ms. Metzler.
Good morning.
You just stated that you're not an attorney. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. But then you used the phrase reasonable and prudent, and I noticed that in your direct, and you used it in your summary. Is that your phrase, or did somebody add that for you?
I think that's, I would use the term reasonable. I would use the term competitive. The attorneys may have added in the word prudent.
Just curious, because that seemed, you hit that on that phrase a couple of times, so I was just curious about that. If the commission were to disallow a portion of these incentive programs, not saying we would, not saying we wouldn't, but just an if, would the company not pay these employees what they're saying they're going to pay them now? Would they somehow cut their pay?
Well, that would certainly be an alternative. I think if we weren't allowed to recover these costs, there are a couple of avenues that we could take. We could reduce their pay and remove the incentive or a portion of the incentive, but that would bring their total compensation below market rates. So we would risk losing those employees and not being able to attract and keep the skilled talent that we need.
So it's important to pay these employees market value, but only if the ratepayers are footing the bill?
Well, again, we think it's it's market competitive pay, so we think it's a reasonable expense.
Okay. I noticed you used the median of the. What areas did y'all look at in determining the median? Is it just the Southeast? Just is it nationwide? How did you determine the median?
We look at a lot of different surveys depending on the position. So if we are trying to benchmark, say, a line worker position, then we're going to look at other utility companies nationwide, not just in our region. If we're and that's sort of an industry specific position. If we're looking for a position, let's say a computer programmer in IT, then we're going to look within the energy industry, but we're also going to look outside the energy industry because we may seek to recruit someone, an IT employee from another industry. So we do look at a lot of different compensation surveys, and we look within the utility or energy industry as well as outside our industry.
And looking at your diagrams that were included in your summary as well as in your testimony, non-executive employees are eligible for short-term incentive pay, but executive employees are eligible for short-term and long-term incentive. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And on the non-executive employees, their base pay is what percentage of what they could earn?
Well, it depends on the position. So it depends on the position and their salary range. So that
that pie chart is covering a lot of different areas. Is that right?
correct.
Can you give me a range of what? Is it 70 to 80% or 50 to 70%? Or?
Well, I can give you sort of a range of their targets. So their targets are set based on their eligible earnings during the year. So if it's an hourly employee, it includes overtime. And it also depends on if they're a union employee, what their union has negotiated. So the targets, I believe, for South Carolina employees who are non-executives can range from 6% up to like 20 or 25% of their eligible earnings. So,
and that's the incentive.
yes, correct, the short-term incentive.
And how about on the executive employees? What do either or both short-term and long-term incentive? What is that?
So again, that depends on position and salary grade. So that can range anywhere from probably 30% up to maybe 150 to 200%, depending on the level and
50 to 200% of their base pay?
Correct.
So someone could actually more than double their base pay?
When you get to the very senior levels. So when you look at Lynn Good, for example, when you look at her total compensation, her base pay is only about 10% of her total pay. So what that means is that only 10% of her pay is sort of guaranteed, and the rest is at risk depending on company performance.
That kind of leads me into the next question. So when you're advertising for linemen or just non-executive employees, how do you advertise as far as what their compensation would be? Do you tell them what their base pay is and then you have the opportunity to earn this much extra? And that could even apply to executive employees. How do you tell people what their compensation would be when you're trying to hire somebody?
So we generally share that with them during the interview process. We let them know what the compensation package looks like as well as what the benefits package looks like. So that's part of, that's a tool we can use as we're going through the recruiting process to attract employees. We usually don't give a lot of details when we advertise the position, but we share that when we get closer to making an offer.
But do you tell them, okay, you're guaranteed this much, but you have the opportunity to earn extra?
So, yes, we explain that the short-term incentive or long-term incentive are at risk to the employee. They're not guaranteed. But if the company and employees perform at certain levels, then they can earn a portion of the incentive, or if stretch goals are met, they can earn above target.
Thank you. Appreciate the explanation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard.
Thank you very much. And I'm going in only because it's so publicized and you mentioned it. But you break down Lynn Good's salary and the way, earnings, I say $21 million. But you break that down into, number one, what percentage of that does ratepayers pay? And then number two, break it down to what constitutes her entire earnings.
So in 2017, the Board of Directors granted Ms. Good a retention award, and I think Mr. or Witness Garti-Tego referred to that on Thursday. That's not an award that's granted every year. That was a special award that was granted in 2017. So she received the retention award. She also receives a base pay amount and a short-term incentive target and a long-term incentive target. And then I think I mentioned earlier that only about 10% of her pay is guaranteed through base pay. The rest is at risk. I will also mention that last week Duke Energy issued its 2019 proxy statement. and that includes 2018 compensation. And her pay in 2018 was much closer to what it was. It was just slightly above what it had been in 2016. I think there was also a question last week whether she was the highest paid utility CEO. And a lot of the utility companies have not filed their 2019 proxy statements yet, but we were able to find 5 that had. And of the 5 CEOs at 3 of the 5 companies received higher compensation in 2018 than Ms. Good received. So she's not currently the highest paid utility CEO.
How about break it down by numbers for me? Okay, out of the 21 million, 10% of it, 2 million, what it comes from the ratepayers in simple terms, or is that rate base? Break it down for me. You don't listen to my arithmetic because you don't want to go there. But you break it down using your arithmetic.
So at this point, I believe we have agreed to disallow 50% of her total compensation.
So you're saying in this case, then $10 million or whatever arithmetic is will be into the rate base.
Well, let me further add that for South Carolina, so when you allocate her salary, her pay, just for Duke Energy Carolinas in this rate case, it's a very small amount. It's actually only 0.2% of the total revenue requirement. So once she's allocated between the different jurisdictions, the amount for South Carolina ratepayers is very small.
What is that amount?
It's just under $550,000.
How do you arrive at? I guess I get curious when somebody says 50% because that just sounds like an arbitrary number. It just sounds like it doesn't sound like it's backed up by any factual percentages or anything. How do you arrive at 50%? Is that, in my way of thinking, that's an arbitrary number? Is it?
I think that historically we have agreed to 50%, a 50% disallowance, and that's something that we've agreed with the ORS and the Commission. That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you very much.
Commissioner Belzer.
I just wanted to follow up on when you said just under $550,000 salary allocated to South Carolina. Is that inclusive of the only charging 50% of the top 4 executives to
Yes.
South? So,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah, that's
includes,
after the reduction.
Okay, thank you very much.
Commissioner Irvin.
Thank you, Mr. We're looking at the test year as 2017 in this case, correct?
Correct.
And Ms. Good was the highest paid utility CEO in the United States during that year, correct?
I haven't confirmed that.
Well, according to the Charlotte Observer, she received $21.5 million in total compensation. That beat her nearest rival by almost $3 million. And according to a news analysis by S&P Global Market, that disparity of 175 to 1 between her 2017 compensation and the median employee compensation was the largest among all utility companies. You don't dispute that, do you?
No, I don't.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions? Any redirect?
Ms. Metzler, I want to follow up on a few things from questions from Mr. Nelson and the commissioners. I think we got Lynn Good, the amount that's in this case, that's compensation, it's not salary. The 550 number you gave allocated to South Carolina, that's all of Ms. Good's compensation that is allocated to South Carolina that we're seeking to recover in this case. Is
Yes,
that right?
that's correct.
Okay. Let me talk about the long-term incentive plan, if you will, please. What employees are eligible for long-term incentive?
So I talked earlier about the top 100, which makes up our senior management committee and our executive leadership team. That group is eligible for the performance share, 70% performance shares and 30% retention awards. There's also another group of about 550 employees who are eligible for the long-term incentive who have no performance metrics in their plan. They receive retention awards only. So the majority of the LTI participants do not have EPS and TSR as performance metrics in their plan.
I want to make sure that even though it's the company's position that all of that compensation is appropriate, prudent, and should be recovered in rates. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, having said that, I want to break down and follow up on what you said about that category of employees. Did you say about 500 employees?
About 550.
550 employees who are, and these folks are eligible for long-term incentive plan. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And they can earn the long-term incentive plans in what fashion? Explain how those people can earn the long-term incentive plan.
So those are simply, their long-term incentive is simply a retention award. So they just have to be employed on the vesting date in order to receive that award.
Is for that group of 550 employees, can they earn that long-term incentive? Is their earning of that long-term incentive tied in any way to earnings per share or total stock performance of the company?
No, it's not.
Okay. So using Ms. Gabi Smith's rationale for disallowing that long-term incentive, it wouldn't apply to that group of 550 people, would it?
That's correct.
Okay. If you took that out, if you took that disallowance and made the correction based on the testimony you just gave, can you tell us how much of the if the commission decided, let me rephrase the question. If the commission decided to disallow the long-term incentive only for those employees whose incentive is tied to earnings per share or the financial performance of the company, what would the number actually be?
$1.7 million.
Now, there were a number of questions about the short-term incentive program. And one of the things I wanted to follow up on was the question about whether in your role of designing a compensation system, why is it important to have a component of compensation of employees tied to the performance of the company?
So a financial metric such as EPS in an incentive plan for employees encourages employees to reduce expenses, to operate efficiently, and to conserve financial resources. So on a daily basis, employees in the field, have that line of sight to that financial goal. So it does encourage them to operate efficiently and to conserve resources and save the company money.
Does having an incentive element in compensation help the company compete in the marketplace to draw good, competent employees?
Yes, it does. We've done a lot of benchmarking with other companies, and it's very prevalent to have short-term incentive cash plans and long-term incentive plans for certain levels of employees. So yes, it does help us compete in the marketplace. If we didn't offer those plans, we would need to roll that amount of compensation into their base pay because we wouldn't be competitive.
But is it better to have a portion of the compensation, in your view, in incentive compensation?
Yes.
Incentives.
Yes, I believe that it is because we can include measures in an incentive plan that really encourage employee behavior that helps us build a strong, healthy company. So without a short-term incentive plan or a long-term incentive plan, we're not able to have those goals that really incent employees to take advantage or to accomplish the goals that will help us build a strong company.
The And Commissioner Belzer asked you about the Figure 1 and Figure 2, which shows that some employees are eligible for long-term incentive, some are eligible for short-term incentive. I want to ask you about the short-term incentive and which groups of employees are eligible for that. First of all, what employees are eligible for the short-term incentive program?
So all employees in the company are eligible for short-term incentive.
How many of that group, and this would be company-wide, not just South Carolina, but how many of those make up the executive leadership team?
About 100 employees.
What is the...
I'm sorry, yes, the SMC and the ELT together are about 100.
100. Mm-hmm. And what is for the rest of the employees that are eligible for the short-term incentive program, how many company-wide employees fit into that category?
Just over 29,000.
Okay. And for those 29,000 employees, what can they do to try to improve in their jobs? What kinds of things can they do to improve the earnings per share of the company or the financial performance of the company?
So they can ensure that they are just in their daily work, they're operating efficiently. They're not wasting resources. They're conserving resources. They can reduce costs. So there are a lot of things, depending on the position, a lot of things that they can do to ensure that they're using the company's money wisely.
The ORS position, Ms. Metzler, seems to be that there's sort of a zero-sum game. Anything that's good for shareholders and the earnings of the company is necessarily bad for customers, ratepayers. Do you agree with that proposition?
No, I don't. I don't think that the shareholder interests and company or customer interests are mutually exclusive. I believe they do overlap, and I think that financial performance does benefit the customer. It helps us keep the cost structure for customers as low as possible.
Now, Ms. Metzler, I'm going to ask you to give us an estimate. And again, I don't want anybody to be confused. It's the company's position that all of the short-term incentive is appropriate to be recovered in rates. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Except for the 4 top employees that we took out that you mentioned. If the commission decided that it wanted to draw a line between the top 100 executive leadership folks and then the whatever proportion of that group of 29,000 whose part of their compensation is allocated to South Carolina, if the commission decided that those folks, it's appropriate for that group, that short-term incentive compensation to be included in rates in South Carolina, do you have an estimate of what the financial number would be? How much of the compensation short-term incentive would be disallowed?
Approximately $1 million. So if you add that to the long-term incentive, the $1.7 million of the long-term incentive that's attributable or based on EPS and TSR, that's about $3 million disallowable compared to the $15 million that ORS witness Smith recommends in her testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Messer. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any recross? Mr. Belzer. Oh, sorry. Just forgot all about you.
You've said that the incentives and the pay is based on a national average, correct?
Not a national average. It's hard. You can't really get a national average. We do benchmarking studies, and we look at a lot of different sources, but I can't say it's a national average. But I will say it's that we target the 50th percentile, which is the middle of the market.
Okay, and that's nationally, though, right? Based on South Carolina income.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Are you aware that would it surprise you to know that South Carolina normally ranks in the mid-40s as far as national income goes?
No, it doesn't surprise me.
One other question. Are the executives that are testifying in this case, is there a bonus or a earning incentive tied to the outcome of the case here?
Not that I'm aware.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Commissioner Belzer.
I'm not picking on Ms. Good, but we heard a lot at night hearings about her 2017 compensation. And I believe counsel had you clarify that the $550,000 figure you gave me gave the commission as allocated to South Carolina was her compensation, not just her salary. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so when you refer to compensation, could you tell me the components of that? It would be salary.
So base salary, short-term incentive, long-term incentive, and then for, in Ms. Good's case, it would include the retention award, or a portion of the retention award that the Board of Directors awarded in 2017.
So that did include a portion of that. Okay. Thank you very much.
Any other recross? Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question, ma'am. I'm just trying to make sure I understand your position or the company's position on the 50% that the company is disallowing it, if you will, for the executives. Now, is it the company's position that the entirety of that compensation is recoverable as a reasonable and prudent expense?
It is, but like I said earlier, we have agreed to disallow the 50% for the top 4 executives.
Right. Could you explain why? If you're entitled to it under the law, or you believe that you're entitled to it under the law, why would you forego 50% of those expenses?
I think because that's something that we've agreed to in the past.
So why not 60% or 70%?
Well, I would like 100%, but
I mean, in terms of foregoing the expense, if you can get by with just 50%, why not cut the ratepayers a break and get by with 40% or 30%? I think my colleague Commissioner Howard was trying to ascertain how that decision was made. Is there any algorithm, metrics that we could identify to help us understand how that decision was made?
I don't think there was an algorithm. I think that it was just based on historical. I don't know the history or when that decision was made in the past, but I think that is historically what we've agreed to, and we just decided not to challenge it in this rate case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Any other questions? Okay. Ms. Metzler, thank you for your testimony, and you may step down.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Metzler, you are excused. Okay, I had a few different scenarios here. Where are we going next with this? Which are we going with the ORS witness?
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that Mr. Parcell for ORS will testify next.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. I want to hear it from you.
So we will call Mr. David Parcell as the next witness.
Thank you.
Mr. Parcell, good morning. Can you please state your full name and occupation for the commission?
Sure. My name is David C. Parcell, P-A-R-C-E-L-L. I am a principal and a senior economist with Technical Associates Incorporated in Richmond, Virginia.
And are you the same David Parcell who pre-filed 59 pages of direct testimony in docket 2018-319E on February 26th of this year?
I am.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No.
Mr. Chairman, ORS would ask the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Parcell be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Parcell's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Parcell, do you also file as an attachment to your direct testimony 2 exhibits marked DCP1 and DCP2?
That is correct.
And do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to those exhibits?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, ORS asks that exhibits DCP1 and DCP2 be marked for identification and entered into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Parcell's exhibits DCP1 and DCP2 will be marked and entered into the record as exhibit number 26.
Mr. Parcell, did you also prepare 20 pages of surrebuttal testimony in this docket, which were filed with the Commission on March the 19th?
Yes.
And do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed surrebuttal testimony?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. ORS asks that the pre-filed surrebuttal testimony of Mr. Parcell be entered in the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Parcell's pre-filed surrebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Parcell, did you also, along with your surrebuttal testimony, file 2 exhibits marked as surrebuttal DCP1 and DCP2?
Yes.
And do you have any edits, corrections to make to those?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. ORS asks that Mr. Parcell's surrebuttal exhibits, DCP1 and 2, be marked and entered into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Parcell's surrebuttal exhibits PCP1 and PCP2 will be marked and entered into the record as exhibit number 27.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Parcell, could you introduce yourself? Have you ever testified before this commission before?
Yes, I have.
And I was going to say, go ahead, tell us about when that has been.
I testified the first time before this commission in 1980. And since that point in time, I've testified in approximately 20 cases involving water utilities, telephone utilities, natural gas utilities, and electric utilities, including Duke Energy.
Can you briefly give the commission a summary of your education and your experience in utility work?
Yes, I testified in cost of capital for the first time in a utility case in 1972. I've testified in approximately 50 jurisdictions throughout the United States and Canada, and I've testified in approximately 575 public utility cases on cost of capital.
Thank you, sir. Did you prepare a summary of your direct and surrebuttal testimonies that were filed in this docket?
I did. I have.
Okay. Can you please present that summary to the commission?
Sure. I've been retained by the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff to evaluate the cost of capital of the current filing of Duke Energy Carolinas. I performed independent studies and in making recommendations as to the current cost of capital for DEC or Duke Energy Carolinas. In addition, since DEC is a subsidiary of Duke Energy Corporation, what I refer to as DE, I've also evaluated DE in my analyses. At this point in time, my overall cost of capital recommendation for DEC can be summarized as follows. I use a capital structure of long-term debt of 47%, common equity of 53%, a cost of debt of 4.53%, a cost of equity of 9.1 to 9.5%, and a total cost of capital range of 6.95 to 7.71%. As you all know, this proceeding is concerned with DEC's regulated electric utility operations in South Carolina. The focus of my testimony is on the total cost of capital. The first step in preparing these analyses is to develop the appropriate capital structure. I've used the same capital structure as proposed in the company's filing, in my analysis. That is 47% debt, 53% equity, which is a hypothetical capital structure. The second step in a cost of capital determination is a measurement or determination of the embedded cost of long-term debt. I have adopted the updated cost rate for long-term debt, that is 4.53% of DEC, as proposed in the company's rebuttal filing. The third step in a cost of capital calculation, the one that's most controversial, is to develop an estimate of the cost of common equity, or ROE. I have employed 3 recognized methodologies to estimate the ROE for DEC. Each of these methodologies is applied to first of all, to a group of proxy utilities that I developed, which are similar in risk, size, etc., to DE and DEC. I've also applied to the same group of proxy electric utilities that DEC's cost of capital witness Robert B. Hebert used. My 3 methodologies and findings are discounted cash flow, or DCF, 9.10%, capital asset pricing model, or CAPM, 6.45%, comparable earnings, or CE, of 9.50%. My recommendation for DEC focuses on the results of the DCF, which is a midpoint of 9.1, and comparable earnings, 9.5. So this is a range of 9.1 to 9.5%. I recommend the midpoint of this range, or 9.3%, as the ROE for DEC. My direct testimony, as well as my rebuttal testimony, also discusses the cost of equity recommendation of DEC witness Robert B. Hebert. In his direct testimony, Mr. Hebert recommends an ROE for DEC of 10.75%. I demonstrate that each of Mr. Hebert's ROE methodologies overstates the appropriate ROE for DEC. The primary differences between my 9.3% ROE recommendation and Mr. Hebert's 10.75% ROE recommendation are summarized as follows. With respect to the DCF method, Mr. Hebert only considers a single source of growth, the growth component of DCF, and that when he uses an earnings per share, or EPS, forecast. That's in his single-stage DCF. In contrast, I consider several measure indicators of growth. In his multi-stage DCF, Mr. Hebert focuses on historic measures of gross domestic product, or GDP growth, which is inconsistent with his refusal to even consider historic growth in his single-stage DCF. So he uses only projected growth rates in his single stage and only historic growth rates in historic, and coincidentally, both of those produce the highest results for him. With respect to the CAPM method, Mr. Hebert uses interest rate projections as the risk-free rate, whereas I use current interest rates. Also, Mr. Hebert's risk premium measure greatly exceeds the historic level of risk premiums. As for the comparable earnings, or CE method, Mr. Hebert does not employ a CE as part of his testimony, whereas I do. This method of analyzing the appropriate return on equity for DEC considers the opportunity cost of capital, and I believe it's an appropriate methodology. Finally, my direct and rebuttal testimonies observe the fact that Mr. Hebert's 10.75% ROE recommendation exceeds every ROE award in the continental U.S. since at least 2016. This fact is evidenced in Mr. Hebert's exhibit RBH-6, included in his direct testimony. Coupled with his selecting among the highest growth rates and use of EPS forecast in his DCF analysis, it is apparent that Mr. Hebert's recommendation is biased in favor of the company. Given that the average ROE authorized by state regulatory agencies for electric utilities has fallen from 10.32% in 2007 to 9.56% in 2018, It is my recommendation that ROE for the EC in this proceeding be set at 9.3%. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Parcell. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Parcell is available for cross-examination from the other parties or questions from the Commission.
Thank you. Company.
Good morning, Mr. Parcell. My name is Frank Ellerby. I'm representing the company. I've got a few questions for you, sir.
Good morning.
I think it's fair to say that you and Mr. Havert disagree on many things. You agree with that?
Yes, indeed.
And among them are what trends are occurring in the country regarding what regulatory commissions are awarding in the way of ROEs. Is that one of the? I'm sorry.
I was expecting a couple more words in that sentence. I didn't think you finished the sentence. That's why I hesitated. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. But let's look at South Carolina, if we can, please, sir. Are you familiar with this commission's decision in December approving rates for SC and G in the merger application, the combined 3 dockets? Are you familiar with that, sir?
In a general sense, yes.
Have you read portions of Order Number 2018-804?
If that's the order approving the stipulation, the answer is yes.
Is that? Did you read the portions of that order dealing with the return on equity approved by this commission in that order?
At one point in time, I did, yes.
Okay. Are you aware that in that proceeding, the ORS had a witness, Mr. Baldino, who testified that the commission should adopt a return on equity of 9.1%?
In a general sense, yes. It's been a while since I read it. But
and are you aware?
In general, yes.
Okay. And are you aware that Mr. Havert testified for SC&G and Dominion and proposed an ROE range of 10.25% to 11% with a recommendation that rates be set using an ROE of 10.75?
I am familiar with that, yes.
And you're also aware, I think you mentioned the stipulation that Dominion proposed to this commission as part of a range of things that the company proposed, including that rates be set to produce a return on equity of 9.9%?
I am, yes.
And is it your understanding that the commission, in its order approving the merger and setting rates, approved the stipulated amount of ROE at 9.9%?
I am, yes.
Is it also your understanding that the commission accepted Mr. Havert's approach, accepted his range, and accepted his cost of capital estimate at 10.75%?
I'm sometimes accused of being a lawyer, so I want to avoid a slippery slope here when they say accepted. I read what they said in order, and it's been a while since I read it, but I did read what they said, but the key is they approved 9.9.
Right. Yes, sir. Can I have the Elmo, please? Are you aware that the ORS asked the commission to reconsider its ROE decision in that proceeding?
No.
Well, I ask you to look at, Mr. Chairman, I'm only going to ask about one sentence from the order on ruling on petitions for rehearing and reconsideration. This is Order 2019-122 at page 27. So what I'd like to do is put it up on the Elmo. And Mr. Parcell, you'll follow with me. Have you seen, now that I've showed it to you, have you, does this refresh your recollection? Has anybody provided you with the commission's order on reconsideration?
I don't recall reading the order on reconsideration, but like I said before, I do recall reading the original order.
Okay.
I don't recall reading this one, no. I may have, but I just don't recall.
Well, the portion I'm interested in is what I highlighted, where the order says the Commission also rejects ORS's assertion that the 9.9% ROE on project costs rewards SCE&G for mismanagement. The actual market cost of SC&G equity is accurately estimated at 10.75%. The 9.9% return is substantially lower. Do you see that, sir?
Yes.
Okay. So, and the 9.9% is the amount that Dominion offered in its stipulation. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding, yes.
Okay. But doesn't that order, don't you agree with me that that order indicates that this commission determined, based on the evidence in the record presented by the various experts, that the actual cost of equity was at 10.75%?
Well, the words they used was actual market cost of equity of 9.9. That's what they said. I'm sorry, 10.75.
10.75.
Yeah.
Yes.
It says what it says, yes.
Does that, would that change in your summary? I noticed you said that 10.75 would exceed every ROE award in the continental U.S. since at least 2016. Does what we just read there change your description of awards?
Not at all, because the award was 9.9, and I would point out that since you brought up Dominion's authorized return on equity in Virginia, where it's called Virginia Electric Power Company, for its base rates, it's 9.2%. And that's based upon a litigated case, not a settled case. So in Virginia, the Virginia Commission has determined in less than a year ago that Dominion's ROE was 9.2%.
They told me you were good.
Excuse me?
Are you aware of this commission's determination of an ROE for Carolina Water Service in 2018?
I've read that, yes.
Okay. And are you aware that in that proceeding, the commission offered a witness, Mr. DeCendis, who proposed an ROE range of, excuse me, this is the CWS witness. The CWS witness in that proceeding proposed an ROE range of 10.45% to 10.95%, with proposed rates calculated to produce a return of 10.5%. Are you aware of that, sir?
I've read the order. Those numbers sound appropriate, and I will accept your representation, because I'm sure you're an honorable person, so I'll agree to it, but I just don't recall specific numbers.
Thank you,
but I will accept those, sure.
Okay. And are you aware that in that same proceeding, the ORS, through Dr. Carlisle, proposed an ROE at 9.08%?
Again, I don't recall the exact numbers, but I'll accept that.
Okay. And are you aware that the commission adopted Mr. DeCendis' recommendation and set the ROE at 10.5%?
I think what the language that I recall reading was they accepted the low end of his range.
Okay.
If that's what you asked, the answer is yes, but it was the low end.
And it was, do you remember whether it was 10.5%?
Well, you give me 10.45 and 10.5, and I don't recall which they actually chose in the order.
Well,
I'll accept the ones you give me, though.
Okay. Well, we'll do better than that. I'm going, at the end of this brief cross-examination, I'm going to ask the chair to take judicial notice of these orders that I'm asking you about. Are you aware that in that proceeding, the ORS asked this commission to reconsider its determination of the ROE for the company?
No.
So I assume that you wouldn't be aware then that the commission declined to reconsider and reaffirmed its ROE in that proceeding?
That's correct. I read the original order only.
Okay.
At least that portion of the original order.
Mr. Parcell, are you aware of a letter that the ORS submitted to the commission this morning proposing what it referred to as a Plan B, by which ORS would go along with an ROE of 10.76? Are you aware of that?
Rephrase that.
Are you aware of the letter that the ORS submitted to the commission this morning proposing to accept an ROE at 10.76.
I think you would say 9.76, didn't you?
I'm sorry.
That's why I gave you a chance.
Looking, you 9.7.
My apology, but yes.
Can't blame me for trying.
It might work next time. Who knows?
Are you aware of the 9.76?
I've seen that letter. Yes.
Did you know about that move by the ORS before it was made?
Was made what?
Before the letter was sent in. Did they discuss that with you before they submitted the letter to the commission?
I'm going to have to object here. This is our expert witness, and talking about what conversations or communications he had with counsel, I think, is inappropriate.
Sustained.
The 9.76 ROE is outside of your range. Is that right, sir?
It's within my comparable earnings range of 9 to 10%. It's outside my final range of 9.1 to 9.5, but it does fall within my comparable earnings range, as the letter states.
Mr. Chairman, we ask that the commission take judicial notice of the orders that I asked Mr. Parcells about, which would be orders 2018-804 and 2019-122 in docket number 2017-370E. Also, judicial notice of orders 2018-345A and 2018-494 in docket number 2017-292WS.
Okay, any objection? Okay, we will take judicial notice of those.
And, Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions for Mr. Parcells.
Thank you. NAACP, Coastal Conservation League, Upstate Forever. Sierra Club. Energy Users. Walmart. I didn't forget you that time, Miss Eden.
That's okay. Good morning, Mr. Parcell. My name is Carrie Grumman. I'm here today on behalf of Walmart. You actually touched upon an issue that I wanted to raise with you to see if you were familiar with it. I assumed, bearing a Richmond, Virginia address, that you would have some familiarity with matters before the Virginia State Corporation Commission. Is that fair?
It's fair, yes.
Included among, I think, one of the discussions that you had with counsel for the company was a discussion of Virginia Electric and Power Company's most recently awarded ROE. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'd like to pass around a document that I'd like to have marked for identification. It is the final order in case number PUR 2017-00038, entitled Application of Virginia Electric and Power Company for the Determination of the Fair Rate of Return on Common Equity to be applied in rate adjustment clauses. Mr. Parcell, are you able to identify the document that's being passed around and that I've asked to be marked for identification?
Yes, it's the final order in case number PUR 2017-00038. It's the application of, we call VEPCO, Virginia Electric and Power Company.
So if I refer to them either as VEPCO or Dominion, you'll understand that I'm speaking with regards to the Virginia entity of Dominion Energy Services.
That's correct. Even though their formal name is Virginia Electric and Power Company, they traded Virginia as Dominion Energy Virginia.
It's not confusing for anyone in Virginia at all.
Correct.
Is when you indicated earlier that in Virginia, Dominion has an authorized return of 9.2%, is this the order that you believe provided that authority?
Correct.
So, Mr. Parcell, is it fair to say that you are familiar with this order?
Yes, I've seen it before, yes.
I'd like to direct your attention to page 4 of that order.
I'm there.
Mr. Parcell, are you familiar with Mr. Hebert's testimony in that Dominion proceeding where he proposed an authorized return on equity of 10.25 and 10.75% for Dominion?
I was not in that proceeding, so I did not read his testimony there, but having seen his recommendation there and other cases I've been in with him in the same time frame, those are his numbers. That's the range he tends to be in.
And I just want to, one of the reasons I want to go through the order is because I'd like to compare it to some of your comments. And you noted there that the commission in Virginia rejected Mr. Hebert's testimony as representing neither the actual cost of equity in the marketplace nor a reasonable ROE for the company.
It's a very general question.
Do you see that portion of the order?
Yeah, well, on page 5, for example.
I want to go, it's page 4, the sentence is, okay. It's the very last sentence of the top of the page. It begins conversely. Do you see that sentence there?
Last sentence on page 4?
Yes, it says, it's the top of the very
yes.
first paragraph, conversely.
I see that, yes.
Okay. And then going to the last paragraph that begins, while the market cost of equity, do you see that paragraph? Directing your attention to the very last sentence on page 4.
On page 4.
It begins, as the commission has previously stated, using
yes.
only earnings per share as a measure of long-term growth rates results in unreasonably high growth rates that upwardly skew results. And that's for the DCF modeling. Is that correct?
Correct. And that's the same criticism I made of him in my direct and rebuttal testimonies.
And you have obviously gotten to my next question. So when I look at your comments here, the first comment you make, number 1, on page 3 of your summary of comments for this commission, that's the same criticism of Mr. Hebert's testimony here.
That is correct.
Returning to the Virginia order, on page 5, first full sentence, the Virginia Commission also criticizes Mr. Hebert's testimony because his CAP-M analysis includes projected 30-year Treasury bond yields of 4.4%. Do you
yes.
see that?
I do.
And is that similar to the criticism that you have in point 2 of your summary for this commission in this proceeding?
That's the same criticism.
And so in the Virginia case, Mr. Hebert proposed an ROE of 10.25 to 10.75%, but the Virginia Commission ultimately awarded a return 105 basis points below the bottom of his band.
Yeah, right. 9.2% was the final authorized return on equity.
And Mr. Parcell, you were also asked some questions, I believe, today about the letter that was filed with the commission this morning regarding the 9.76% ROE that ORS has proposed in a Plan B. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
And do you understand that that 9.76% represents the national average for vertically integrated electric utilities, I believe, since 2016?
Yes, that was quoting...
I believe it's quoting Walmart witness Tillman.
Yes, in my notes, as a matter of fact, he proposed that 9.76 integrated. He said the authorized returns for the 3-year period, 16 to 19, was an average of 9.61, median 9.60, but the integrated average was 9.76.
And although that may be slightly above your proposed band, do you find that to be a reasonable ROE to award to the company in these proceedings?
It's certainly more reasonable than 10.5.
No further question. Well, and I'd ask that the order that has been marked for identification be moved into the record as an exhibit.
It will be exhibit number 28.
No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Grundman. I'm going to call you by your right name, too. If I got you, call you by your wrong name. Okay. That's why I messed up the first time. It's my story. Any other cross? Commissioners? Mr. Urban?
Mr. Parcell, good morning.
Good morning.
In your testimony on page 11.
My direct?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Let me know when you get there.
I'm there.
Thank you. You note that the impact of the Great Recession has been a reduction in actual and expected investment returns. I'm just curious, why have the average ROEs continued to decline while the overall economy and equity markets have largely recovered?
Right.
I'm asking, how do you account for that?
Well, if you look at from the market aspect of it, you're taking for your beginning point the very low point of the trough, if you will, of the stock market, and going to say the peak, and the peak occurred in maybe the third quarter of 2018. So going from the very low to very high, you get it pretty good. But between then and in Christmas Day of 2018, we had over a 20% drop. That's referred to as a correction, big time correction. But if you look at it, interest rates have come down throughout that period. Even though they went up a little bit in the first half of 2018, they came down. The February yield on double B utility bonds was 4.05%. A year ago, it was 3.97%, virtually the same. If you look at treasuries, February was 2.68. In March of last year, 2.84. I mean, interest rates have still, even when they went up a little bit, they're still lower than they were a year ago.
And in fact, the Federal Reserve has sent signals that they are probably not going to raise rates for the remainder of the calendar year.
Well, that's major. The Fed has raised rates 4 times per year, March, June, September, and December, a quarter point each time for 2 straight years. And before that, they did some annual changes. And that is, the Fed had maintained the Fed funds rate at 0.25 for several years. So they'd been moving them up a quarter of a point per year for the last couple of years. And the anticipation was they would continue doing that. Well, when March rolls around for time to do it again, they not only passed this time, they said they're not going to do it the rest of this year, and maybe only once in 2020. And in response to that, you may have also read in the press what's referred to as a negative yield curve. And those are rare. What a negative yield curve means is that short-term interest rates are higher than long-term. And that's counterintuitive because there's risk of only a long-term asset. So the 2 things have historically happened when you had a negative yield curve. First of all, rates are going to go down in the future. Second of all, and these 2 are related, by the way. And second of all, there is a fear of a recession. And that the whole dynamic has changed. And I'm not going into reasons why we may have a recession, the trade war. That's not my purpose here today. But there's a lot of concern about that right now, and that the dynamic has changed with the Fed, and rates have come down even more than the February rates I gave you.
So putting that in some perspective, as investor-owned utilities have to go to the debt market, that bodes well for them in terms of getting lower rates in the foreseeable future.
Yes, for 2 reasons. First of all, if they sell debt at a lower cost. And the second is because utilities are a safe haven. When there's uncertainty in the markets, people are more inclined to buy a utility stock because there's less risk there. And in my rebuttal testimony, I showed how the betas, for example, which is a measure of volatility, has gone down for utilities over the past 5 years. The market's always won. And utilities went from like 0.6 to 0.4. So the utilities are a safe haven, and in bad times, it's a good place to park.
And that bodes well for them going forward as well.
Absolutely.
Because as soon as this recession hits, everybody's going to want a safe investment. They're going to move from speculative stocks to stocks that have less risk.
Even before that. It's before
even before that.
Yeah, people try to anticipate.
Yeah. The market anticipates, 6 to 9 months, a year out, what might happen.
Well, that's, the market is not an entity. The market is the market. It's made up of different people in different institutions, so they each have their own expectations. But collectively, that's probably a fair assessment.
And so the rates that you've been using, really, if you put it in some perspective, you have to factor in where they're headed as well, because that will impact a company's ability to actually save money if they have a lower debt burden. Is that fair?
Well, yes, but to be fair to the company, the cost of debt only goes down after you sell debt, because your debt load and your debt cost is a culmination of all your debt to date, which you have today. It only changes when you either retire debt or sell new debt. But as they sell new debt, it'll be at a lower cost. In fact, in my rebuttal, I point out that the cost of debt for DEC is currently 4.53%. And the embedded cost as of February of AA-rated utility debt was 4.05%, which is less than the company's average cost. So if they sold it today, it'll bring down their embedded cost of debt a little bit.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Before we continue with commissioners and any recross, we're going to take a brief break.